I tried to tell you not to test my rage, cause you just a yellow belt and I'm a Jeskai sage. You know the deadly martial arts of the black and the white lotus. Someday I'ma be the POTUS, you'll still be a giant scrotum.
What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from SBMTG down there on the youtube.com. We like magic, and today I got something a lot of people have been fairly excited for since I first mentioned it. We're gonna do Jeskai. You know, just about a year ago, Jeskai was one of the top dogs in the standard meta. You know, you had Dark Jeskai, Red, White, Blue, Splash, Black. You had regular old Jeskai and Jeskai Ascendancy combo even. So a lot of players loved those decks, and ever since then we've been wondering if we can make America great again. I can't even barely say it. But anyway, not an endorsement. But anyway, at first I wasn't sure if we could. This deck has actually undergone more rewrites than any deck I've done in a really, really long time. No less than 9 times have I rebuilt this deck. Between these 5 sheets of paper, there are, in this front and back, there's like a million different rewrites of this deck because I've been working on it for like 3 weeks, and at first it felt pretty clunky. I was playing a lot of Planeswalkers, and I wanted to emerge Deep-Fiend on turn 4 or 5, and it just wasn't quite working. But I think I've finally come up with a build of the deck that I am comfortable putting out to all of you. I think this version of the deck is pretty darn good and plays a lot of flash creatures and cards at instant speed, so it can function like a control deck but still have a fairly offensive plan and some good tricks on offense too. So, all of that being said, let's take a look. I wonder how many dislikes I'm going to get just for saying that's not an endorsement. But anyway, let's talk about some cards here. If we're going to build anything based on blue and red in this format, the first thing I want to do is play Elder Deep-Fiend and Kozilek's Return. Just 2 incredibly good cards that work very, very well together, and the interaction is fairly obvious, you know. Emerge in or even hard cast Deep-Fiend, and suddenly the Kozilek's Return in your graveyard can wipe the entire board. Super sweet interaction, especially considering you can tap 4 permanents down, usually lands, and you can do all this at instant speed during their upkeep, destroying all of their creatures and tapping down all their lands so they can't cast anything for the rest of the turn. All of that's really, really, really good. So I'm going to play 3 copies of Deep-Fiend, and it was 4 for the longest time, but we'll cut it down to 3 copies of Deep-Fiend, and we'll play 3 Kozilek's Return in the deck. This combo is really, really good against both mid-range and aggro decks, and Kozilek's Return is good against aggro decks just in its natural state. You know, it's just a 2 damage to everything spell, especially at instant speed. That can be really, really good. And just another thing that helps us function like a control deck and do more things at instant speed. I've been seeing a lot of decks that play things like Toolcraft Exemplar. Red-White Vehicles is a pretty popular deck right now, from what I can tell very early on in the standard meta. Still don't have any tournament results as of the recording of this video, but I have a feeling that Red-White Vehicles is going to be a force for at least the first couple of weeks of the format while people try to figure out how to deal with vehicles. And this combo is pretty good against vehicles because it can be done at instant speed during their combat step after they've already crewed their stuff. So really like that about it too. Got to point that out. Vehicles, I think, are going to be more important in this format than people think they're going to be right this second. Now, if we're going to play Deep-Fiend and game plan around it at all, we have to play a fair range of creatures that we can emerge in. Now, if we're going to go Jeskai, I think one of the best reasons to do it is Reflector Mage, which I'm going to play a whole playset of in the deck. It's just incredible. You know, one of the best creatures in the format right now. A great reason to play white if we're going to play white at all. And it's a good way to emerge in Deep-Fiend on turn 4, you know. By the time turn 4 rolls around, you know, you've played your Reflector Mage last turn, it's already done its job. You know, it's done what you wanted it to do. You can usually safely emerge it without having to worry too much. And one of the cool things about this trick is that if you do it right, sometimes you can keep them from casting a key creature for 2 turns, you know. Play your Reflector Mage on turn 3, turn 4, emerge in Deep-Fiend, and you can tap down lands during their upkeep and keep them from playing that creature for yet another turn. So that can be really annoying and a pretty cool trick. But we have to play more creatures than just Reflector Mage, so since we're in these colors and we have to play good creatures and we want to play like a control deck, I think the best thing we can do is adopt a Spirit's sort of sub-theme here. And I know there are issues with a particular card, and I want to go ahead and address those. We're going to play a 4-of Spell Queller in the deck. Now, I know the gut reaction to this is that you probably don't want to play Spell Queller in the same deck as the Deep-Fiend Kozilek's Return combo. You don't want to either emerge your Spell Queller to get in your Deep-Fiend, and you don't want Kozilek's Return to kill the Spell Queller. Makes plenty of sense because then they'll get to recast their spell. But a couple of things we're doing in this deck can definitely ease the tension here. And I just want to point out a rules thing before I talk more about this. Section 601, comprehensive rules. When you cast spells, you pay cost first before cast triggers go on to the stack. So in this case, let's say you have a Cause's Return in the graveyard and you want to cast the Deep-Fiend and you want to emerge your Spell Queller in order to do so. Now, if Spell Queller exiled a creature when it entered the battlefield, if it exiled a creature spell, then sure, they'll get their creature back, that's fine, but they'll get their creature back before the cast trigger goes on to the stack. So by the time Kozilek's Return goes off, you'll be able to kill their creature. It will be in play by that point. Section 601. But anyway, we are playing other ways to protect Spell Queller in the event that Kozilek's Return goes off and we don't want to lose it. Namely, Force Selfless Spirit, which is one of the best cards in the deck, to be honest with you. It facilitates so much. Allows us to keep all of our guys out whenever Kozilek's Return goes off. You know, we're also playing Avacyn in the deck, and it's really, really good interactions with Avacyn. You know, when Avacyn flips, we don't have to kill any of our guys when Avacyn flips. We don't have to worry about that as long as we sacrifice the Selfless Spirit. And it can force Avacyn to flip when we need it to. So lots of good interactions in this deck because there's plenty of ways that we have to wipe the board in this pseudo-control deck. But with Selfless Spirit out, we can keep all of our dudes, which is usually just win. We just win when that happens. Now, a card that goes well with both Selfless Spirit and Spell Queller is Rattlechains. We're going to play 3 copies of Rattlechains because with Selfless Spirit, it allows you to play Selfless Spirit at instant speed, which is a very powerful option to have. And with Spell Queller, obviously this can help protect the Spell Queller. Not a bad turn 2 play against some decks either, going ahead and putting some pressure on. So lots of reasons, I think, to place Rattlechains in the deck. And it's not a bad way to emerge in Deep-Fiend for just 5 mana, because by the time you emerge it, it's usually already done its job anyway. So a lot of reasons to play this. We've got to play a fair amount of creatures in the deck, and this covers a lot of ground for us. We're going to play 2 copies of Archangel Avacyn in the deck, and I've already talked about its synergy with Selfless Spirit, but it's just one of the better creatures in the format. You know, we're playing over 20 creatures in the deck, which means that this is just another thing that can protect all of our guys at instant speed, by the way. That's really, really good. It's a huge flash flying threat. That's awesome too. We can use it to wipe the board. That's great. You know, it can help us if we have enough mana in the late game. We can say emerge into Deep-Fiend, recast a Kozilek's Return out of the yard. It'll do a 5 to everything, but we can just cast Avacyn at instant speed if we have the mana for it and save our whole team. So lots of good stuff about Avacyn in the deck. Definitely do this. And to finish off the creatures, I'll finish with a flexible slot here. This is 2 copies of Filigree Familiar. I'm just playing this in the deck for a few flex reasons, and it is a flexible slot, to be honest. Like, this could have been like Pia Nalar, but I'd want this slot to be another creature, definitely. But Filigree Familiar takes some of the strain off of the mana base. It's surprisingly good against aggro decks, like really fantastic against aggro decks, and is the perfect emerged thing, you know, to play this turn 3 for whatever mana you got. And then turn 4, you can emerge in your Deep-Fiend, draw a card. That's pretty cool. So I just like Filigree Familiar as sort of a utility choice in the deck. But again, flexible slot here. I really do. I want the slot to be a creature. If you change the slot should be a creature because I want to play over 20 in this deck so we can reliably emerge in Deep-Fiend. There's a lot of balance to this deck, so I just don't want to disrupt it too much. But I could see this as a flex slot. Filigree Familiar has been very good for me so far. On to the spells, though, and I'm going to tell you about a few of these at the same time, because a lot of these are meant specifically to cover the early game for us. And yeah, we've got Selfless Spirit, Rattlechains, they can both be cast early, but most of our formula, most of our plan is mid-game action, so we've got to cover at least turn 2. And here's our ways of doing that. We're playing 3 copies of Harness Lightning, 2 copies of Declaration in Stone, and 3 copies of Revolutionary Rebuff. Now, there are definitely specific reasons to play all of these. Harness Lightning has been surprisingly good because it can take out Smuggler's Copter at instant speed. And Smuggler's Copter, I've been seeing it everywhere, not only on X-Mage, but like articles that I read. A lot of people really like Smuggler's Copter. And it's definitely looking to be a force in the format, and Harness Lightning can take care of it at instant speed. Also against the Red-White Vehicles deck, I want to point this out. If you used 1 Harness Lightning early in the game to take out, say, a Toolcraft Exemplar, then your second Harness Lightning, you have 5 energy, you can now take out a Sky Sovereign, a card that this deck has some issues with, to be honest with you. So that's a very important thing to point out. And Harness Lightning, just good, and also good against opposing Spell Quellers too. So there's that. A Sylvan Advocates it's good against, so yes to Harness Lightning. As far as Declaration in Stone goes, I want something that can take out any creature, no questions asked, and Declaration's good at that. But it's also good against these zombies that are in the format. Blue-black zombies is still attempting to be a thing, but one thing that I've seen a lot lately is a Grixis Emerge strategy that uses Deep-Fiend, Kozilek's Return, just like we're doing, but it also uses, you know, Prized Amalgam, it uses Haunted Dead and stuff like that, things that can come back from the graveyard, and that is actually not a bad-looking deck at all, but Declaration in Stone can take out things forever and exile them, so you don't have to worry about dirty tricks like that. So, Declaration I think is important for a couple of reasons. Now, Revolutionary Rebuff, fantastic against Planeswalkers and early creatures like Sylvan Advocate especially, and anything in the vehicles deck that's not itself a vehicle as well. So, Revolutionary Rebuff has been pretty good, and it was 4 copies at first, cutting it down to 3, because again, Smuggler's Copter, very important card right now, from what I can tell in the format, and Revolutionary Rebuff does zilch against it, and Fleet Wheel Cruiser and Sky Sovereign. So we don't want to play all of the rebuffs, but we want to play a few so that we can get them in the early game when we need them. So I think 3 is the right number. I'm going to finish off the removal here with 1 copy of Stasis Snare, and there's a push-pull here. Stasis Snare is very good because I keep encountering a lot of decks that want to cast Emrakul, especially earlier in the game, these Aetherworks Marvel decks that want to cast Emrakul very, very quickly. Stasis Snare is very good against that because you can play it at essentially instant speed, but get around the protection from Instance Clause. And then Sky Sovereign. Stasis Snare is also very good against Sky Sovereign at instant speed, one of the only ways that we can take it out in the main deck. The problem, though, with Stasis Snare is that it's bad against Fragmentize, which almost always comes in from the board against white decks, and then Nahiri, which is seeing a little bit more play than it was in the last standard. At least preliminarily, again, I'll preface everything by saying that this is sort of what I can tell from the very early beginnings of the format here. But Fragmentize is very popular, and Stasis Snare is very bad when they side that in. So there's that to consider, but it's just so good against Emrakul and Sky Sovereign, especially Game 1, that I think it deserves at least 1 slot. That was a lot of explaining. Hope you were into that. Sorry about all the battling, but we're going to finish off the main deck here with just 1 copy of Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. Now, not only is this sort of a metagame call, I think that Gideon is pretty good against some of the control decks that I see popping up from time to time here at the beginning of the format, at least. Very good against control decks when we resolve it. But it's also good against all of our own board wipes that we're playing, you know, Avacyn and Kozilek's Return. This is a sort of form of insurance because we can get right back on the board after we wipe it. So I like that about it too. And a lot of these, you know, vehicles decks that I've seen will side this in, you know. And I like to have it as a main deck option for the same reason that those decks like to side it in. You know, good against board wipes, and in this case it's good against our own board wipes, so I think that in our deck it warrants a one-of main deck slot. And you can't count out its emblem either. Gideon's emblem is really good in this deck because it's got a lot of small flyers and stuff, so we can just pump them up a little bit. It's kind of like better than an always watching because it's a lot more flexible. But it's also good to have a sort of anthem effect in the deck because we've got so many small flyers. This can be fantastic. On to the lands. We're playing 25 of them, and this is the distribution that I felt most comfortable with for a while. The deck has undergone a lot of rewrites, but I have stuck with this basic configuration for a while, although I was playing Sanctum of Ugin, and at a time I was trying to play Aether Hub as well in the deck, but Sanctum of Ugin just wasn't working like I wanted it to, especially considering towards the end I'm not playing 4 Deep-Fiends anymore, so it wasn't quite there, and I wanted as many colored mana sources as I could possibly get. So I ended up completely cutting Sanctum of Ugin, which I think is the right move, but I'm open to it not being the right move. And then Aether Hub, I cut when I stopped playing a couple of cards that I'll talk about here when I get to the cut section. Here's a fairly important sideboard, and you may notice that's only 3 Galvanic Bombardments. And usually I play 4, almost no matter what. But against these small creature decks that we're going to side in Bombardment against, we probably don't need Bombardment to get to 4 or 5, so 3 copies I think is fine in the board. Fragmentize is very important against vehicles. I'm just going to throw that out there. There's Aetherflux Reservoir decks and Aetherworks Marvel decks in the format. You know, we see some infinite combo decks that use modules and stuff. There's plenty of artifacts that this can take out. And Smuggler's Copter's already brought that card up, but I see it so much that I got to point it out. Fragmentize is almost worth a main deck slot. I'm totally serious. Now, before I get to the power rankings, I might just start doing this with every video, but before I get to the power rankings, I want to talk about some cuts that I made, because I've worked on this thing for 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more than that, actually. I just checked an imaginary watch. I've been working on this thing for a while, so much that I'm delirious and checking my wrist, and I haven't worn a watch in years, but Anyway, this deck has undergone crazy amounts of rewrites. I already talked about that, so I've cut a bunch of cards. Let me run through those very quickly. I've cut Planeswalkers, just at large. You know, we're playing the one Gideon, but I was trying to do a thing with Dovin Bane and Jason Raveler of Secrets, and we're playing, you know, 2 copies of Chandra Torch of Defiance and 2 copies of Nahiri, and it just was not working. It was super clunky, and we want to do, you know, sometimes we want to Emerging Deep-Fiend on turn 4, but we also want to play a Planeswalker. Just, it's kind of awkward. It's not a good flow, so I cut most of the Planeswalkers in the deck. You know, I don't think that's a mistake. The deck is definitely performing better than it did when it had 9 Planeswalkers in it. So let me know how you feel about that decision in the comments, because this could be a different deck. But anyway, other things I cut were Void Shatter, because Spell Queller and Revolutionary Rebuff are definitely enough. Pia Nalar I cut for Filigree Familiar, although I could see switching that back. Pia Nalar's a very good creature. I've talked about her a lot. I've already talked about cutting Sanctum of Ugin and Aether Hub, and after I cut them, I couldn't play Thought-Knot Seer or Eldrazi Displacer. Thought-Knot Seer got cut before Displacer. I was playing a 2-of Displacer, and then down to a 1-of Displacer before I said, F it. I just cut all the lands that produced it, because I didn't like Sanctum of Ugin in the deck. I wanted more colored mana. I wanted Aether Hub to be a little bit more reliable for colored mana too, so I just cut that whole plan, so I'm not playing TKS or Eldrazi Displacer anymore. I was playing Anticipate and Glimmer of Genius, and Glimmer of Genius was a little bit better when I had the Aether Hub plan going, but just not quite there. Glimmer of Genius is really good. It is, but in this deck, I wasn't a big fan of it. They're more creature-based. We want to flash in guys at the end of their turn and stuff. Anticipate almost could make the main deck. I'd really like to have a way of, you know, drawing a bunch of cards, or at least some cards. Some card selection would be nice. So I feel like we're thin on that in the main deck. We need to be able to draw more cards. If we're, you know, if we're weak in one area, it's that I want a little bit more card advantage. But I can't find the slots for it. I'm not willing to cut anything as it stands right now. And then Torrential Gearhulk I was playing 1-of, but it just wasn't, that also wasn't reliable enough and was just a little bit above curve. That's a lot of cards I cut. And there's actually more than that. Those are just like the ones that I think about the most at night when I'm trying to sleep. Also Skyweller's Shot, ended up cutting that from the board. But anyway, let's talk about the power rankings real quick. Here they are. Your final score of 68, which is a pretty competitive score. Again, approaching 70 is fairly competitive. Very competitive in a lot of cases. And you see that we are pretty good in most categories here. I think that we just graze that 8 in power. It's almost a 7 in power. I think we just barely clear that hurdle. Fairly good synergy in the deck. You know, we've got a Merge synergy, we've got Spirit synergy in the deck, synergy with Selfless Spirit and Avacyn and Kozilek's Return, so all of that synergy is definitely present. Very versatile deck and good defense as well. Because although it doesn't look like we're playing a lot of defensive cards, you can go down the list. Elder Deep-Fiend's defensive, Kozilek's Return, Reflector Mage, Spell Queller, Selfless Spirit's a defensive card, Rattlechains defensive, Avacyn is defensive, Filigree Familiar a defensive card, Harness Lightning, Declaration in Stone, Revolutionary Rebuff. Literally every single card in the main deck is a defensive card. So good scores in those categories as well. Just pretty solid deck build here, from what I can tell at least. But here's the bad news. The deck will cost you about $220 for the main board and the lands, and another $40 or so for the board, putting it at $260. Now if you get moderately played or even damaged copies of cards, you can bring it down to like $235 to $250 so on TCG Player, but that's still a fairly big investment in a deck, definitely. But a lot of these cards are going to be sticking around for a good long time. There's that to consider, you know, and it's a pretty fun deck to play. It's more controlling than it appears to be. It's almost a tempo deck in a lot of ways. As a matter of fact, it almost straight up is a tempo deck. Reflector Mage, very tempo-y, you know, Elder Deep-Fiend, super tempo-y. But we've also got a lot of big board wipes in the deck and ways to protect our own creatures. So in that way, it kind of feels like a mid-range or control deck too. So this deck wears a lot of hats, making it very versatile, because it's not all over the place necessarily. A lot of the things that we do feed into each other, giving us pretty high synergy. So altogether, the deck is fun to play, although it could take a few games to figure out the proper order of operations on things. It's not a very easy deck to play. That's all I got for now. Let me know how you felt about this one, because again, I have built this deck a million different ways at this point, and I've been building it for a while, and this is the deck that I was most comfortable putting out there on YouTube and putting my name on. So I feel like the deck is performing a lot better than it was when I first started building it, and it actually is performing better than when I had all the Planeswalkers, and it just felt really clunky. So let me know how you feel about it and how you would change it. Maybe you think the Planeswalker build sounds better. I'm telling you, there were issues. But anyway, what are we doing next time? which is an important question. Well, next time it's budget deck time. We'll do competitive, then budget, then competitive, then budget. So budget's turn next, and I'm going to do the turtle. We're going to. I don't know why I like to call it the turtle, but the mono blue energy deck that seeks to play a lot of small creatures that give you energy in the early game, and then play the Aether Squall Agent in the late game. Bounce everything back to everybody's hands. Then you can play your small guys again and get enough energy to just bounce everything every single turn if that's what you have to do. So that's a good deck, and it actually has been doing kind of well. Fantastic, better than I would have thought for a deck that's only going to cost like $15 or $20. Also, tournament coverage very, very soon. It's Saturday as I record this right now, and it'll probably be Monday before the video actually comes out. So in that time frame, we're going to see results from an SCG Open, the first big tournament of the season, and I can't wait to cover that, which is probably going to happen early next week. So look for that video too. Just all the new stuff. Subscribe if you're new so you can get all that content. And then like this content if you enjoyed this content, because it's like the best thing you can do for me. You can also share it, whatever you want to do. Comment. I want to know how you felt about it, because I've worked really hard on this one. But anyway, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, my wizards.